All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the August edition of the Cells of Society seminar. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Can I get a thumbs up? Everyone see that okay? Good to go? Great, thanks. Hi, welcome to the August edition of the Cells of Society seminar. My name is Andrew May, and I'm with the UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and I help to coordinate this series along with Chris Callahan and Hans Estrin. So today our topic is the Institute for Agroecology. So UVM Institute for Agroecology, Seeding Change in Vermont and the World. So we're going to have a dual presentation here with Ernesto Méndez, who is a professor of agroecology and a faculty director at the Institute for the Agroecology, and Scott Lewins, who is an extension entomology educator and is with the Plant and Soil Science Department. Should I still be including the Northwest Crops and Soils program too, Scott?
I think it's safe to say you can officially say I'm now a part of the Center for Sustainable Ag. So
fantastic. I didn't want to brag too openly, but yeah. We've recently had Scott join us at the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, which is really exciting to me, and I look forward to all the things to come. So, welcome. So a bit more about the Cells of Society seminar. Our overall goal is to promote connections, transfer of knowledge, interdisciplinary collaboration, effective leverage of research findings, identification of new research questions, and a collective impact. So the seminar series is meant to be an opportunity to promote collaborations and ultimately to weave a stronger network of relationships and professional connections within and across CALS and with other departments across the university. So here's the team that we currently have working to put on the seminar. So thanks again to Chris and Hans, as well as Kathy and the rest of the media team and other folks in communications that help us to do our promoting. So this is a collaborative effort. So please send any suggestions to the link that you see at the bottom of the screen at go.uvm.edu/cells2society seminar. And you can also view the schedule and past recordings there as well. So the way that it works is that we have monthly virtual seminars, including the one you're seeing today. So it's meant to be an opportunity to share research and education and new opportunities when work within CALS and beyond. So these seminars typically have 2 speakers each, and then we punctuate every 3 months. We punctuate our sessions with an out-of-the-box brainstorming session where we have emerging themes for new projects and we discuss them in small groups, and it's meant to be a more interactive and engaged collaborative process around themes to hopefully have some brainstorming and some new grant proposals that come out of that as well. So here's our standing schedule. We typically are on the second Thursday of every month at 2 p.m., but occasionally that changes, like today. So stay tuned for some of our topics in the coming weeks. And as I said, any suggestions, please submit them at the link shown below. And as I also said again, we have all of our recordings posted on our YouTube channel. So please share that with folks that couldn't make it today, because we like everybody to be able to join these and see what happens, even if they can't be here at the time that we schedule. So with that, thanks again for being here, and I'll turn it over to Scott and Ernesto.
thank you, Andrew. And Ernesto is going to start off once he gets off mute.
Can you see my screen?
See you and hear, or see your screen and hear your voice.
Okay, thank you so much. First of all, starting with gratitude, thank you to the organizers for inviting us. We are going to do a bit of a tag team here. I'm going to present about the Institute, and Scott is going to present on a participatory action process that he's been working on with Vic Izzo for a while now. So they are embedded, related, interactive, and the first thing maybe that I will say is, as you know, the Institute got launched this March. It was safe to say over a decade in the making, and we are really excited. We are building ourselves from the ground up. And what I wanted to do today, thinking that there's going to be extension people, which is really exciting for us. We want to connect and interact with extension. I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration, is to let you know how is it that we're landing now that we are more established as an institute, and leave a lot of time for questions. So the first thing is, what is it that we do or we are aspiring to do in the Institute? And we like to use the term transformative agroecology. So agroecology has been around for a while now, and since the 60s, and it's evolved. I've been engaged with agroecology for at least 25 years, and I started doing a lot of more biophysical work, more agronomic and ecological work, and now trying to really integrate that with social and cultural and political processes. So the transformative piece is really important to us. We are really trying to change the way our food systems are and the way they function, who participates, and this leads us to intentionally say that we want to understand these multiple dimensions, but also that we want to tap to all these different knowledge systems, including science, but also including indigenous knowledge, the practical knowledge of farm, others that work with the land and the sea, and that we want to focus on these ecological, sociocultural, economic, and political processes. And I think not taking into account each one of these is a mistake that we have all done in the past that have more disciplinary backgrounds. And it doesn't mean that we all need to be experts in all of them, but it means that we are aware and that we're paying attention, so that if we're doing something more on the agronomic side, we are also aware what are the political and policy processes that affect what we're doing, where are the possible windows of opportunity to support and advocate for a policy that might really make a difference in terms of scaling whatever practice it is that we're trying to work with farmers. That might be more at the farm level, but with support from state or federal government could be taken up to scale to the state or to the national level. And I like to show this picture from the International Panel of Experts in Food Systems, because my work has really shifted to focus on this transition and transformation process. And you can see here two starting points. One is industrial agriculture, which is more of what we see in the Midwest United States and other places in the US and in Europe. And the other one is subsistence agriculture, or it could be smallholder agriculture that we associate with the Global South. And basically understanding that both of these systems, a lot of them are in crisis, and they need to transition into something better. So this transition process that we are trying to do through an agroecological approach takes different steps. Some of them are the same. For example, building knowledge is the same for both systems, even though the systems are very different. Diversification is also one that we believe could help any system, but then some others are different. And the transformation that we seek, that we aspire to, because we might never get to it, but we have to hope that we can, is where we reach these, which in this picture are being called diversified agroecological farming and food systems. So understanding and supporting and advancing this transition process for a deep transformation is what the Institute is really interested in doing. And to do it, I'm going to go to this first and then come back to that. And the way we want to do it is through these three guiding pillars. And the first one is that we are seeking this deeper transformation that is at the systemic level, that addresses structural issues, that acknowledges power structures. And even though I'm not a political science, I understand that there are these structural issues related to government, to the organizations and institutions that have a lot of financial and political power that affect everything that I do. So I just don't want to ignore it. Going back to what I said before, paying attention, having awareness, identifying those links from the farm to these bigger scales is really important to us. Our second pillar is the way we do research. And we do it through participatory action research, which I define simply as doing research with people for people, and also using a transdisciplinary approach. And I will talk a little bit more about this in another slide. And finally, we are aspiring to center equity in everything we do. This has been a really big change for us since the Agroecology and Livelihoods Collaborative, which was the precursor of the Institute, in that although we were very aware in doing our work, we were not really trying to make this one of our guiding principles or pillars. And now we want to do it in every single program we do, in every educational opportunity we deliver, is we want to center this equity piece. Who is participating? Who's being? Are we talking about some of the racism issues or classism issues that are all over society today? So we really don't want to shy away from that. And again, these are issues that are not necessarily going to be resolved, but we also think that not ignoring them is very important. And saying, even though I was trained in natural sciences, or I'm an extensionist and I don't have this training, I really think it's an important issue and I'm going to engage with it as best as I can. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this one. So this is our website, and the reason I wanted to present this is I want to bring to everyone's attention that we're having our first global convening of the Institute. We're calling it Seeding Transformation. If you go to our website, you can see there the website address at the bottom. You can register now. There is one afternoon of public events with an amazing panel, series of panels. And we are inviting, there's about 50 people coming from our international networks from Latin America, Africa, and Europe. And it'll be really exciting for you to get to learn from them. How is it that they're doing agroecology where they are? And just engaging in some stimulating conversation. So I hope to see everybody there. There will be a live stream option, but we have a lot of space. So if you can make it in person, please try to do that. Okay, moving forward. So I talked about the pillars. The way we actually bring these pillars into action is through these strategic action areas. So we engage in research, transdisciplinary and participatory. We are also very committed to acting as conveners. And this global forum that's happening in the fall is one example of that. It's been interesting that from our funders, right now we have a lot of foundation support, philanthropic foundation support, and also a lot of our partners and other research institutions around the world. This convening piece is something that is in high demand. When we were building the Institute, we hadn't realized that, but this is the second convening we do this year. I'll talk about a national one a little later. So this seems to be a piece that the Institute will play a stronger role than maybe we had visualized in the past. Cultivating is all about education and training in different ways. We have a certificate for agroecology that many extension people take. We're really excited about that. We also do non-credit professional training, and we are hoping to expand that to doing more courses with different types of partners. I was just talking with a colleague today about doing a course in Cuba that could bring people from all over the world, again, to look at the Cuban example, how they've done agroecology, but also to infuse some of our ethos into Cuban agroecologists. So doing these standalone, maybe week-long courses. Amplify is a lot about our narrative and how do we communicate and really paying attention and being intentional about telling our stories in an accessible way, and also sharing all of our research findings as widely as possible with minimizing the barriers. And the final one, Activate, is just the work that we do with farmers, with communities, to support them in their everyday actions. And that takes the form mostly of accompaniment as much as we can, but also with a lot of listening on how we can be helpful. So I wanted to go back to this transdisciplinary part and what it means. When I hear transdisciplinarity, for me, it's bringing different systems of knowledge in the best way possible to support, in this case, our transformative agroecology approach. So there's all these knowledge out there in science, practice, social movements, indigenous knowledge. And what we try to do in the Institute is to bring them together and to be in that little red circle there. That's our sweet spot. And it's also a challenging spot. I'm very interested in dialogue. These are some of the things that the experience of building the Institute have left within me, of how important it is to be able to have dialogue with people that think differently than you do, and sometimes with very polarized parts. And I see this happening when you try to do transdisciplinary work and you try to get a scientist to really have a conversation with a farmer, maybe not an agronomist, but think about, I don't know, a social scientist that doesn't interact with a farmer very much. Policy. And then also across to social movements. So having this dialogue with activists and farmers and people from nonprofits. Excited about being able to do this work. I'm trying to get more training on it because it is challenging, but I think it is really important to achieve this transformation. I mentioned participatory action research, and Scott's going to talk a bit about it, but for us, it usually has three dimensions, we could say. One is the research that we do, which can use a variety of research methods, social science methods, but also natural science methods, depending on what the research questions are, which hopefully will be co-created between research partners and community partners. Reflection is another dimension that is really important, which is in the green arrows there. And that's checking in with everybody to see how we're doing. What did we learn? What did we like? What didn't we like? And what do we do next? And then the red arrows are action. And this is which is usually the most important for community people and farmers, is when are we going to apply this learning? And in this case, in our position, we usually can accompany people in this, and maybe not that much more. The other piece about transformation that I've been always including in my recent talks is this personal work. And this is a lot about talking to a lot of different people across the world interested in transformative agroecology, and realizing that some of the way we want people to engage with their work in this more equitable way, in a way that addresses colonialism, gender dynamics, anti-racism, etc., really takes some internal work. It's really hard for us to engage with, for example, with anti-racism if we grew up in a racist community. We don't have any blame in that. But that's where we were. And our system is played with some of these very systemic, deep, intensive issues. So how do we do that internal work as individuals to really engage in the way that we are aspiring to engage? So I'm going to go through quickly some of the things that we're doing in the global, the national, and the regional level. So in our global reach, these are three of our programs. We have this longstanding work with the McKnight Foundation, the collaborative Resilient Food Systems Program, where we work in South America and Africa. And this has been really great for us because they have aligned recently with a transformative agroecology approach. And we engage in supporting research, but also participating in research and also doing some educational work. Coffee agroecology work in Mesoamerica is now a little bit without a lot of activity, but we're hoping to go back to it. And the global agroecology convenings is the best example, is what I just shared at the beginning with our global forum in the fall. One new program for us is a national level program in agroecology. We had an agroecology summit in May in Kansas City, Missouri, where 100 people from all over the United States came, including academics and activists and other people engaged in the food system and interested in agroecology. And again, we heard loud and clear, maybe the Institute can play this convening role to have a national conversation about agroecology. The reason we did in Kansas City was because we were trying to influence the USDA so that they can be more supportive of these approaches. So we might start doing every other year a national convening of some sort, which hopefully will come to Vermont. And there's a lot of interest from funders, so I think we can get the support to do it. We do have to be aware of how much work it is, and that I could easily, not careful. But these are things that are interesting out there at the national and global scale too. And the local and the regional, which is something that I hope that we're going to have a lot of collaboration. Right now we have 3 programs. The first one is one where we did some advancement with support from the Food Systems Research Center, and we're hoping to fund this work with NOFA Vermont and rural Vermont, centering around agroecology transitions. We have an ongoing urban and peri-urban agroecology program, mostly in Burlington, and working closely with the Intervale and 4 other organizations, and the on-farm power with Vermont farmers that Scott's going to talk about. So those are examples. There are others, and there's a lot of ideas. We just have to be aware of not taking more than we can do. That is really important to me. And we have this infinity loop vision of all of these different scales, from the global to the local, informing each other. You could think the national is right in the middle, but this is really important to us. If you know me, you've heard me say before that I love Vermont, but I've always felt that sometimes we don't seek knowledge outside of Vermont enough, and we don't invite people to come to Vermont and learn enough. So this co-learning is really, really important to me. It's really important to the Institute. And it would be great if we can get extension people to get involved in this co-learning, both here and abroad or nationally. I am going to stop there. Thank you so much for your attention and for the invitation. With that, I don't know, Andrew, if you want questions now or if we shift to Scott.
Yeah, let's have Scott go ahead, and we'll save all the questions for both of you at the end, if that's all right.
Sounds good.
That works for me, and hopefully you are seeing a slide here. Perfect. Thank you, Ernesto. So yeah, as Ernesto mentioned, I'm going to share sort of a case study, or case studies, if you will, of some work that Vic Izzo and I have been doing here with Vermont farmers and students and researchers, and actually I should say Miriam Nouriain is a postdoc who's working with us now, and so yeah, we're really excited to be a part of the new Institute for Agroecology. I am in extension, although I work across CALS with many of the folks here on the call, and so it's really lovely to be able to share some of the work that I've been doing that you may or may not know of. And I just want to say really quickly, thank you, Hans, Chris, and Andrew, and the whole CALS team for inviting us to present. Let's see if I can advance. All right, so really quickly, I I want to talk about sort of put in context the process of participatory action research and how that works as it relates to what I'm calling here as the typical process, and I'm talking about the scientific method. And so, you know, what we all learned, or at least if you have a degree in some science about the scientific method, is you observe a problem and you come up with a hypothesis, you test it, and then you make conclusions, and then use those conclusions to inform your next set. That when thinking about applied research often means that where researchers are observing and coming up with questions to test and testing them, and then sending that information out to the real world, and then those practices that you may be recommended can be adopted. And that process can be problematic. This is a nice example from a grad student who posted on I can't remember the platform, probably X or what was Twitter, of sort of, again, that research status quo. So us academics, we publish findings in journals. Here is represented by water, right? And we want to get the knowledge, right, that we have in the journals to our practitioners. And if we only publish in journals, well, we can see here where the cynic might say the knowledge winds up. And so from a participatory action research standpoint, really our goal is to get as much of that water into the glass of the stakeholders, in this case, the stakeholders who this here is a picture from pre-COVID times of one of our, you can tell it's winter in Vermont here because everyone's, you know, even though inside is still wearing hats and coats and gloves and whatnot. So this is a PAR meeting we had, and sitting around the table, we've got farmers and we've got researchers and we've got extensionists and we've got students. In fact, there's someone at the table who's all four of those. And we're coming up with questions together. And as Ernesto mentioned, the process, if it's done well, is equitable and it's transdisciplinary. And it's really the key in my mind is thinking about everyone's perspective and co-creating and then focusing on the long-term benefits. And this can be a challenge, as we all know, because the way that we fund research and grant cycles doesn't always value the same things. And so this is that schematic that Ernesto shared before, again, highlighting that there's different periods of time in the PAR process. So I think you'll see my cursor here, and Ernesto, give me a nod if you see my little arrow. So there's a preflection period where we all come up with our preconceived notions. We come together, we make decisions, and then we go and do those various steps in the process of investigation, reflection, action that Ernesto explained. And one of the keys is that I have always focused on is this iterative nature of the PAR process. It's not a one and done thing. So we have our findings, we come back together, we have another one of those nice meetings where we eat lunch and we talk about what we saw and we come up with ideas for the next round. And then we do that PAR process over and over and over again. And again, that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to the typical funding model for a lot of the academic research that we're all engaged in. So with about another 15 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is try to breeze through what I'm calling our PAR processes at work. So when I'm saying our, I'm including, of course, Vic Izzo, my research partner, all of the farmers who we've been working with, the funding agencies, the academic institutions that we've been a part of, and many, many more who are all engaged in this process at different points. And equally valued in the process is what's most important to me. So as I mentioned before, funding for the PAR process can be tricky, especially this preflection period, right? So Vic and I, this is back in 2016. This is a crowdfunding tool called experiment.com that we used to get some money just to do some very, very preliminary work, just to get an understanding of what farmers were even thinking. And again, try to pitch that to a funding agency. We'd like to figure out what the problem is not usually how we start our grant proposals. And you'll notice interesting names like Vic's brother, my mother, some garlic farmers, right? So we literally, got the entire community, our entire community involved, and raised, just about $4,000 to get some just basic understanding of what the problem was, right? And in that process, we learned about an invasive insect pest, the leek moth. It first made its way into Canada and then the US in 2009 and then Vermont in about 2012. And it's a pest of allium crops, so garlic and onions and leeks, as the name suggests. And this is a caterpillar right here. It has multiple generations, and for us insect geeks, I call it a pseudo leaf miner. All you need to care about is that it likes to chew on the inside of that leaf material and leave that characteristic window painting damage. So this is what a really heavily infested onion field looks like, and this window painting, that's the characteristic damage caused by leek moth. Subsequently, you can get things like purple blotch, a bacterial disease that comes in. So it can really do a good job on folks' onions. It's different in different alliums. So this is a garlic scape. So garlic has a very different structure to its leaves, and so here this is the damage. It's not the same window painting as we saw in the onions, but again, it can do significant damage to the plant. Right. So we think about what's all the prior knowledge, right? So in that process of preflection, there's a lot of conversations with academics and farmers and practitioners and community members, right? And so we wanted to gather as much as we could in that process. So we learned a lot about the life cycle. This is actually a figure that was website showing the life cycle, again, those multiple generations in a year. This is what a male caterpillar looks like. This is what the pupal case looks like on the end of a scallion, right? Not only do we take the prior understanding of the ecology and biology of the pest, but our prior understanding of how farmers are dealing with the issue. And so you might have heard before, I mentioned that it was invasive on its way to the US through Canada. So the early research in North America was done by our colleagues in Ontario and Quebec. And they pretty early on showed some success with using what's called floating row cover. They also did a lot of monitoring to know when the pest was even there with these pheromone baited monitoring traps. Once the pest was in New York, that obviously caught the eyes of Cornell researchers, and there's a really big onion growing region out near Oswego, New York. And so Tony Shelton and his colleagues did a bunch of work early on in the invasion in New York, and they found that these are all different insecticidal controls from a lab study that they did. And the top part, these are all conventional insecticides, and then below the blue line, these are organic insecticides approved for organic production. And really, the only one that showed organic, at least, the only insecticide in lab trials that showed any efficacy was spinosad. And if you know anything about spinosad, you know that in a lot of crops that are grown organically, that is the only method of chemical control that's really effective. And so issues around resistance are very concerning. So again, for those big muck growing, the big onion growers in the muck growing region of New York who grow conventionally, they can use Tony and his crew's information. But for a lot of the small diversified farmers in northern New York and New England, those weren't options. So we developed in collaboration with our growers a set of questions, and there's questions on this side of the screen that are more relevant to what a researcher might be interested in, and then of course there's the questions that the growers are interested in. And so the sweet spot is where we can ask questions that are both relevant and interesting to a researcher as well as to a grower or a practitioner. So we were successful in getting funding in our first true iteration. We got a specialty crop block grant. First, to ask the question of, well, where is this even an issue at all? And so through a couple of years and some partnerships with growers and other service providers, we ultimately we did sampling across 49 different farms. About half of them we did ourselves, and the other half the farmers were actually doing the monitoring themselves. And the goal was to get at least a comprehensive glimpse at what the leek moth the distribution of the leek moth population was in the state. And we did that over 3 years. If you remember the timeline, this was before that crowdfunding research. I actually was an instructor over at St. Michael's College, and I got some funds from my college to do the research, and Vic used his time in the summer, and so we got some data from a few counties. The next year, so sorry, I should start over. These are heat maps. The darker the red, the higher the density of leek moth. Counties that were white were 0, and counties that were gray were not sampled at all. So again, this was shoestring budget in 2015. And we got our friends and family to kick in some money. So we expanded our area. And as we were expanding our search area, we noticed leek moth in a wider area. And then we got that specialty crop block grant funding. And then we were able to sample the entire state. I'm sorry, this should be white, not gray, but I didn't have time to go back and fix it. So in this last year of sampling, you'll notice deep dark red in the corner northwest and non-existent in the southeast corner. And so that's generally the pattern of the invasion. It first showed up, if you know anything about the geography, Vermont, right? Northwestern Vermont and New York are connected right here above the lake. And so it's likely that the moth invasion started, right, and made its way from the northwest and moving southeast. And we did some back of the napkin calculations, and it was roughly 40 miles per year. And in fact, we've seen in subsequent years, it's shown up in New Hampshire and Maine, and it's also all the way as far out as the Atlantic provinces in Canada. All right, so I just want to quickly go through some of the trials that we did. First thing we did at the Hort Farm was we did a variety trial. We looked at 6 different varieties of red onions, 6 different varieties of yellow onions. We wanted to see if there was any differences among varieties. It was a randomized complete block design. These are the varieties of red and yellow onions. These were informed by the growers saying, hey, these are the most common, or the varieties that we're most interested in growing. And so that's where we got the treatments from. And what we did was we pulled them and looked at the damage of the different varieties. We looked at the weight. We scored them in the field before we harvest them to see the level of leek moth damage. Right. So what we found was kind of interesting. So for yellow varieties, this one variety that happens to mature a little earlier, right? The leaves were gone before the leek moth, the second generation of leek moths that did damage. The caterpillars didn't have any food, right? And so there was far less damage for this one variety that matured early, but the others that were all in the field were not significantly different. About 70% of the leaves were damaged. Whereas all of the red onions the following year were less than 10% damaged. So we were like, interesting. Was it a year effect, or was it that red are actually less interesting or enticing or more tolerant or resistant? So what we did the following year was we did a sort of checkerboard where we put red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow side by side to try to get at that piece, right? And what we found here, I'm running short on time, so I'll just say really quickly, no matter whether there was damage or not, yellow onions had a higher level of leek moth. And whether it was a red or yellow, interestingly, all of the damaged onions had a higher bulb mass. So the bulb in onions is what you're selling. So I wouldn't go and recommend getting your onions infested by leek moth, but certainly we weren't seeing any damage monetarily to the yield of the onions from the leek moths. So that's great. We can tell farmers with some confidence, don't worry about the leek moths. As long as they're not in your bulb, then you're not going to have a problem. So then that brought up, again, in our next iteration, questions about, well, can we just cut the leaves off the onions, leave the leaves and the leek moth in the field, and then just store our onions? And some people were like, oh, that's brilliant, and others were like, no, that's crazy, you can't do that. You'll suffer a quality loss. So we wrote a SARE grant. Thank you, SARE. We got it funded to test those questions. We also were interested in some biological control agents, so we ran a trial with a parasitoid wasp that I'll mention. So really quickly, the post-harvest handling of that second iteration. So we cut onions at 1 inch, 6 inches, 10 inches, or uncut leaves right at harvest. Then we cured them. Then we weighed them. Then we stored them for 6 months. And then we cut them open to look at the sugar content. So we wanted to see if there was any impact of the leek moth, of the cutting of the onion on leek moth. And was there any impact of cutting on onion on bulb quality? And we were measuring quality by the amount of the rotten layers, and then we also looked at the sucrose content with a Brix meter. Right. So no surprise to us, the uncut bulbs were damaged, whereas the others were not damaged. Kind of cool. Looking at post-harvest handling, 6 months later, we looked at sugar content and again looked at the rotting layers to see if cutting those onion leaves had an impact on. And we did this at 2 farms, Border View Farm up on the Canadian border and the Hort Farm in South Burlington. And what we found was that there was actually relatively low rot across the board, only 9 out of 50 bulbs from each of the treatments. We did see a huge impact on site. So the red bars here are from Border View, the 4 different treatments, and the blue bars were from the Hort Farm. So the site impacted the quality, but not cutting. There was no significant difference of cutting, or what I'm calling topping here. So that's cool. You can cut them. You can leave the leek moth in the field. You bring your onions in. You can cure them. You can store them, and you don't have a leek moth problem. I mentioned that the biocontrol agent that we were also interested in, this Anatis is a company up in Quebec that we partnered with, because they sell a form of this wasp that is not commercially available here in the US. The ones that are here in the US are commonly used for things like sweet corn, where you can hang these little hang cards in your sweet corn. But in this group Anatis, what they came up with is a neat little like sachet with a popsicle stick, and we could just put that right in the onion field. And so we did that. We had 6 sites in 2019. 2020 was a wash. It was really, really hot. And we got no data, probably because we fried the trichogramma. And then 2021, we had release and no release plots, so we had them separated by more than 200 meters, and then we had plots of onions where on those different sites where we had the trichogramma, and then plots where we had no trichogramma, and then we put out little sentinel insect eggs to confirm that the wasps that we put out were actually parasitizing. And in fact, we showed that they were parasitizing our sentinels, so we know that they were doing their job. And we also looked at the damaged leaves, and we noticed across the board up to over 50% reduction in damaged leek moth up to 50% reduction in damage of leaves by leek moth in all of the sites. Sometimes we had huge reductions. The following year, about the same, except for one site, we tried something new in Burlington, this really cool treatment where instead of using those little sachets, I actually sprayed the parasitoid wasps onto the onions. It was really cool. I think that process reduced the efficacy a little bit, but across the board, we still saw that reduction of about 50% across the board. Right. One of the other things that we did as a part of this was we migrated the Leak Moth Information Center that had been housed at Cornell. They were no longer interested in maintaining it, so we took over the Leak Moth Information Center for the United States. So this is now, actually, we just made this change at the end of 2022, and so we are in the process of updating the information that we've gotten. Some we've created ourselves, some we just got directly from Cornell. And so that's a shameless plug for that. This winter we had another round post-COVID. We could finally get together again with our growers, and we had another iteration of a reflection period and some decision making, and then that led to this current iteration that's about to start. We just got a specialty crop block grant to fund some additional work for this next round. So you'll notice basically 4 different funding sources, actually 5 different funding sources across almost 10 years, and multiple iterations of this PAR process. Ultimately, we've co-created knowledge with our stakeholders, and I'm a little short, and I want to get to questions, so I will just say that I really appreciate, again, the invitation, and I am more interested in hearing now from you all. So I will stop sharing, and I think there may be some questions in the chat. So Hans, looking at a decade, can you highlight 1 or 2 important goals or benchmarks that point to a successful launch and development of the Institute? I guess, Ernesto, that one's for you.
Thank you, Hans. When this global forum has become established, and it's happening every other year, and that we are recognized that as a platform, transformative agroecology is, or you can come here and learn about transformative agroecology, and this, I just think these convenings are really important. Attached to it, we have the aspiration to create some kind of a leadership fellowship. We've been discussing that with people that have done them. There are quite a few actually out there around food, and what people that have done them are excited about it. So, in a way, trying to combine the two, or this event maybe is the end of a 2-year fellowship for young leaders and older leaders too, but with a big focus on multi-generational exchange, and also bring together people from grassroots organizations and research and extension and policy, that red circle, right? And the other one that I would say is, I heard this word in Kansas City. Someone said, I don't want to do any networks anymore. I want nets that work. And I have an aspiration that we are going to create several of those. I particularly want to focus on one in Latin America. And I'm currently serving in the board of the Latin American Scientific Society for Agroecology, that has a lot of influence from Mexico down to Argentina and all of these Latin American countries. And the aspiration is that these are going to be networks for co-learning, but also where we fund case studies, long-term case studies, where we're bringing those learnings and all focused on transition and transformation, to learn from them, extract lessons learned, and disseminate that. So those are 2 things that in 10 years I would be really happy if we've been able to do.
Thank you.
Let's see. What's OOB?
Oh, I think that was a follow-up question, which was more specific around, and it's somewhat selfish in the sense of the three of us are on this Self Society and out of the box brainstorm session.
Oh.
So we have upcoming, we're always looking for like, oh, so are there sort of, Scott, you mentioned there are tons of ideas. Are some of those ideas that could be really ripe for some just getting together and with in this forum like this with some people and discussing where to go, and if there are proposals that could come out of it, and if so, we could follow up after.
I'm gonna say something that I think is I think I've said to several people in extension, but I'll say it again. And I think that one kind of support that we can provide is to sit down with you and think about even your current projects or new ones, and together think through how, if you're interested in applying some of these pillars, how would you do that? Right? Like, so you could say, I'm doing extension with vegetable farmers. How do I bring the equity piece in there? Like, I'm really interested in having those conversations. And I will say that there's a lot of opportunities from the funding side too, for new projects that include some of these dimensions. So that's one piece where I would be interested in. We have some people already reaching out to us with very specific ideas, and I welcome those. I can't promise that we can support them all, but we do have at least one extension person with a USDA idea that we're interested in. So really, really excited to engage, Hans, and have those conversations. And I feel that lately I feel that that's all I do is have conversations. I don't do very much research.
Leslie has her hand up, and then also Rachel Leslie. I saw a question about insects, which I want to get to, but Leslie, go for it, and then I'll go back to Rachel Leslie.
A question in the chat, and I thought now easier to just say it. And I actually have a question for both of you. So Ernesto, just in thinking of ways that the Institute could have kind of the biggest impact, at least on agriculture in the US, you know, there's often talk about how big companies have bought up lots of farms in the Midwest and driven out small farmers. And you know, sometimes they're looked at as the enemy, but they are also probably looking for ways to have a good public face. And are there ways to engage with these large companies and maybe find some paths with them, but also get some funding from them? And have you thought
totally.
about?
No, this is super important, and I will say that we are not prioritizing that right now. I just want to be honest, but this speaks to the kind of dialogue that I was talking about, where I believe we need to remain open and have those conversations. And I do think that I've actually been talking to someone who's doing the opposite. They're working with the Vermont Law Center, trying to prevent companies to buying all this land and having it go to communities.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that there are some companies there's a lot of change in leadership, right, in the corporate sector too. And I think there's going to be more opportunities to collaborate with them if they, in my opinion, if they are serious about bringing a sustainability value to the work that they do. But like I said, you know, it would be hard for us to do, because the problem with working with companies is that sometimes you lose face with the grassroots movements. It would be great if you could do both, but it's really hard. That's
you just have to get bigger.
Yes.
And then I had a couple of questions for Scott. So Scott, it's really interesting that the leaf moth was having different impacts to two sites in Vermont. And so do you have any hypotheses about why Border View Farm is different than the Hort Farm? And then what state in the United States has the worst problem with leaf moths?
Yeah, Leslie, it's really interesting. And as as we've continued to watch the invasion of this insect, even over time, there's been differences, like up in the northwestern corner at Border View. When we started in 2015 and 2016, that was some of the highest densities. Now it's some of the lowest densities. And so there might be something going on where over time, the natural community of predators and parasitoids are just developing ways to keep the population down naturally. So that's great news. That we don't have evidence to suggest that. That's just an observation and a thought for why we're seeing that pattern. And so maybe the invasion will sort of make its way through Vermont and eventually just sort of get established in equilibrium, and then we won't have to worry. I don't know, but that's one possible answer. In terms of the worst, right now, I do think Vermont probably sees it the most. It's a combination of not a lot of conventional growing, as well as a lot of small farmers who don't necessarily have the same resources to manage intensively. It is showing up in Maine and New Hampshire, but the growing regions where it's showing up are not very large in those states. So I think folks in Massachusetts are keeping an eye out because it is in southern Vermont and will likely show up in Mass, and so they will probably in the future see similar levels of damage.
Well, thank
And
you.
then,
Really,
yeah,
I was just saying, really interesting.
thank you. And Rachel, I saw your question about the wasps, and I do want to say that the trichogramma wasps are naturally occurring. So it's not like we're going to create a new problem by releasing them. All we're doing is releasing them in really high numbers, occurring in high enough numbers to provide control. And it's a strategy that's been widely used for decades.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for joining today, and thanks again to Ernesto and Scott. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else did as well. And as a reminder, I'll be posting this in the next few days to our YouTube page, so you can find everything on the Celsus Society website at UVM. And our next conversation is going to be with Tony D'Amato on September 14th, and the topic is going to be about forestry. So tune in for that, and I think that's going to be a great one as well. So thanks again, Scott and Ernesto, for all of your time, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody. Take
Bye.
care.